We're talking about John 19,
My son's going to join us.
19 through 22. And last time, in 17 and 18, we spent 2 weeks looking at Jesus is now hanging on the cross. And this period that we're looking at now, Jesus is still conscious, still alive, but he is hanging on the cross. And there are a few snippets of detail that John provides that we're going to be looking at. The first being this morning with this idea of signage or declaration. Here is the text, and the text reads, Pilate wrote an inscription, a sign. He put it on the cross, and it was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. That's a direct quote. Therefore, many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew 1, Latin 2, and Greek 3. Now, I recreated that inscription just so we have a visual image. Who knows what it really looked like or where it was actually placed, but this is just a visual representation. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, don't write the King of the Jews. Rather, we want you to write, he said, I am the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. Now, let's look at signage. What is generally true about a sign? And there are about four or 5 points here. First of all, a sign is never to be mere decoration. A sign is always meant for declaration, not decoration, but declaration. Kind of cute, huh? A sign is designed to shape how you and I think or act at any given moment. It's always in real time, in a real place. Whether it is a sign of warning or information or points the way, a directional arrow, a sign is meant to be in real time, in a real place. A sign names reality at that moment and invites a certain response, whatever the sign is indicating. And then lastly, a sign is always placed where it can be seen. There's really questions on where the sign was placed and so forth, but that's really secondary. But it is designed, Pilate put his sign at a place that the population around could see. The sign is in 3 languages. What sounds like a narrow title, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, is actually anything but narrow. And that's where we're going to deep dive into this session. From the beginning, the very beginning of time, from Abraham's call in Genesis chapter 12, Israel's calling was never just for itself, but for the nations. The original calling of Abraham, I'm just reminded, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in you, Abraham, all the peoples of the earth shall be blessed. Even Jesus reminds the temple leaders much later, quote, my Father's house is to be a house of prayer, and he adds, for all the nations. Now, Israel was to have impact on the nations, but very differently than we in our Christian experiences have cast it. We primarily look to the gospel message, and we're carrying information out. That was not how they cast being an influence. It was primarily through their lifestyle and their covenant cohesion towards in oneness and in covenant with God. It was to draw people in as the nations. And the temple itself, which is very an interesting statement, the temple, which we tend to cast as a very exclusive place, which that's how it was operated, was actually in design to be a house of prayer, communion for all the nations. So Israel is not a tribe, God's favorite among all his children. There was a call upon the nation of Israel to be a blessing to all the nations. The inscription on the cross appears in three languages: Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. And I got those recreated there in front of you. Hebrew is at the top, and then Latin, and then Greek is at the bottom. And these are representative of the three symbolic languages of the world at that time. The first is the language of religion. The second, the language of power and culture. We could switch those two, but together they represent the fullness of humanity. What's happening on the cross then is not tribal. I can't overemphasize that. It's not tribal. It speaks to every people, every system, every story. Remember, it's a sign, and it's in three languages. It's in three languages for a purpose, because Pilate's intention is for all present to be able to see it. And it's symbolic, every system, every story, every people. So there is a greater symbolism that I think John is tapping into here. The sign becomes a declaration of a truth meant for the whole human family. So that's where we are at this point in the presentation. We have a sign, it's public, it's made for declaration, and that is to be representative, a message for all the people, including the readers in the 21st century. So what is John's intent? That's what we want to look at here. John draws our attention. He didn't have a vision for 2026, but he had a vision for his first century readers, which and at the time that he wrote it, and that has been passed down throughout centuries and now millennia. John draws our attention, us readers, to something we might otherwise just rush past. Today's presentation is probably the most time you've ever spent on the inscription on Jesus's cross, my guess. May not be, but my guess it is. To the first century reader, that would have been his immediate audience. King of the Jews meant it had a meaning. As they read it, they framed the meaning, because signs are an attempt to communicate. And what they framed in their heads was, it was meant king of those who struggle. Remember when Jacob received the name Israel in the book of Genesis, the name Israel means he who struggles with God. So there is a struggle in the naming of the Jewish people. In there, and that's only part of it. King, that he's king of those who live in it should be unresolved faith. Typo. King of those who live in an unresolved faith. They were in a position where they had been given a promise. They had that promise under the Davidic reign, have lost that promise, and they're searching. Where is God in all this? And king of a people attempting to remain faithful under pressure. These people were hurting people. They had experienced decades, centuries of foreign occupation, and they're asking, God, we are faithful to you. Where are you? So these are people in tension, in conflict. So the term King of the Jews means that. It means that very thing. These people were the one down kind of people within the culture of the Roman dominance of that day. And that's how this term would have been framed to those early readers. In contrast to that, the signage, the message, the sign communicated, Rome, the power structure of the day, they think kings are all about force. He who has the bigger sword, the bigger club, the bigger whip is the one who wins. That is the Roman way of thinking. In a similar, different but similar way, Israel, as a nation, they think kings are to overthrow enemies because of their struggle. They're waiting for God to act. And the way that God is going to act in their minds is that the Messiah will usher in a new kingdom and the Jewish people will reign with him forever. That's their mind. It's still about force. It's still about power. And that is what is in their heads. But what we see on the cross, fellas, is an entirely different depiction. Jesus is reigning at this moment, fellas. Now, for a lot of time, unspoken and unprocessed in my head, I took the view of Jesus as a kind of a Superman figure, that Clark Kent was the mild-mannered reporter, and just bear with me with this analogy, and at times his divinity would shine through, Superman, if there's a phone booth nearby. And at this particular juncture, I viewed it as, well, the divinity side of Jesus is being suppressed at this moment. He's having a Krypton moment, and once he's killed, he's going to show that he really wins. So the Superman is the Superman image is that, now this is unspoken and this is out of my head, at least how I profiled it, but that Jesus is kind of in and out. He's divine when he's performing a miracle, or he's divine when he's resurrecting from the dead. But on the cross, he's human. I tend to counter that idea at this juncture in my life. I think Jesus is showing us divinity right here. He doesn't cease from being divine or human while hanging on the cross. Jesus is reigning at this very moment from within this struggle itself. Remember, he is King of the Jews. The term Jews has struggle. He, as a representative of humankind, fully in solidarity with humankind, is struggling at this moment, and he is in full reign. That's a hard idea for us to get around. Bear with me. He has, at this time on the cross, he has entered it willingly. No one is taking his life from him. He is now absorbing the evil and the violence of humankind and willingly taking it on. And through that, he's exposing the false powers that are shaping it. What we're doing here, and Carl, you brought this up a few weeks ago when we met. It's a way the church has looked at the cross quite differently than many of us look at the cross. But I feel it's a fuller expression and can have tremendous bearing in how we view, especially union with Christ in our experience. So the inscription becomes unintentionally true. I don't believe Pilate was being profound here. I think he was just stating what he wanted to state. And his unintentionality turns out to be true because truth cannot be thwarted. At this moment, Jesus is king, as I've already said, not because he ends the struggle, but because he reveals what God is like inside the struggle. Here's another important piece as we look at the cross. In my mind, for years, it was about Jesus did something. There was a mechanism that took place in regard to evil through Jesus's death on the cross. But the question is, what is that mechanism? What actually happened? And without it being examined, I kind of thought he took care of death. No one, I can't say no one ever told me this, but this is kind of what I came to believe. But that belief does not line up with reality because evil still exists. So if evil still exists, what did Jesus do? It is monumental, but how do we understand it? And that's what these sessions are all about as we're moving through here. I think in line with what John's intent is all about. So he's king right now. He didn't cease to be king, and he doesn't end the struggle through his death. But because he's now revealing what God is like inside the struggle. This is a slight nuance, a way of thinking that can be very helpful. And that very helpful is that the cross is God showing us what God is like within the struggle of real life. It is this struggle that all humans throughout all of history know quite well. Those of us on this Zoom call, all of humanity, I don't know of anyone that gets through this life. Of course, my experience is limited, but I just don't know of anyone who gets through unscathed where struggle is not a reality. It's what we all experience as being human. And Jesus is experiencing that as human to the max on the cross. This sign, meant for mockery, John lets stand as truth. Jesus is king right here, right now. He is king of the ones still wrestling with God, the idea of Israel, or the idea of the meaning of the word Israel, with power, with fear, and with hope. He is representing all of humanity and humanity's struggle in these moments while he is being dying on the cross. Now, the pushback at the moment is through the religious sector. The religious leaders object. They don't like Pilate's sign. They want the sign changed to reflect their interpretation of what they think is right. Not that Jesus is king, but he claimed to be king. And that in itself is the human condition, often personified through religious wording. We want Jesus, we tend as humans want to define and make Jesus into the kind of Jesus that we need Jesus to be. And that's what these people are doing right here. They want to control it. But in reality, Jesus is hanging on the cross. And these people are getting exactly what they want. They want Jesus out of the picture. But according to their perception, how they're viewing it, that's not good enough. They're not getting what they want. They want to control what is being said down to the very detail of interpretation. They want it the way they want it. This reaction exposes the depth. I don't think it's these guys are the bad guys. I think they're representative of the human race on what we are when we think we're in charge. Their reaction exposes the depth of the human drive to control the story, the narrative. They want it like they want it. Now, from this perspective, I'm introducing this little image of a flashlight. And as we attempt to understand what's happening on the cross, as we look in these next weeks together, this idea of the flashlight is really a good little analogy to remember, because it's going to show us two things. The cross is like a flashlight, and this is, my analogy, showing us, first of all, the ugliness, the depth of what we as people are capable of. Now, let me qualify that. There's a wonderful aspect of being human because we are in the image of God. Human beings have done and created wonderful things in life. That's one side, but we're not talking about that side right now. We're talking about, through what we see happening, the violence on the cross is the ugly depth of what we are capable of as human beings. In contrast to that, but the same flashlight, the cross also reveals, think of a flashlight as that which reveals truth. So the first truth it reveals is what the ugliness of what we are capable of as human beings. But at the same time, the cross is also revealing the depth of what God is willing to allow because he loves us. Those two dynamics, the revelation, they're both revelation. The revelation of the human condition and the revelation of God's marvelous love and grace. Those two things those two truths working in tandem with one another is a really great way to cast our perceptions of the cross. Pilate's final words. Pilate responds, "What I have written, I have written." They wanted him to change it, and he says, "No, it's done. I'm not going to go back and do it. Rechange it for you guys." Now, my position is I don't think Pilate became a magical believer in Jesus here, although John's clear on the fact that Pilate is reluctant and he doesn't believe Jesus is guilty. Well, that's absolutely true. But I think what's happening here is a strange, what I'm labeling as a strange, unintended clarity for whatever reason, and to cast this with the idea that truth stands regardless. In this moment, truth stands firm. Not because Pilate understands anything, but because reality remains as is. Fellas, I keep going back to this time and time again, that there is a truth, and Jesus is showing us that truth. What else is existing, what's happening in the background, is the narrative that these humans have built in their heads that is actually false. It's not true. It's what they think is true. It's what they've created. It's what dictates and informs their violence, but it's not truth. And truth stands regardless. This is how we're casting the cross, or putting it out. The cross reveals what simply is true. And what simply is true is like the flashlight. The cross is revealing to humankind the depth of the baseness of us, what we humans are capable of, and at the same time, the marvelous grace and love and patience of God that is being revealed. Those two truths are being revealed, and that is what is true. Now, an illustration of this, this isn't just something I pulled out of a hat, guys. This has been building for 19 chapters. And we could talk for hours about this, but Jesus made a claim in John 14:6. He says, I am the way. He is showing us, he is the way, and he's showing us the way, which is defeating sin, evil, and death, not through a greater force, of which how we tend to think, but through allowing it to dissipate and deflate and reach total exhaustion, like a deflation. That is the way. That's his way. I am the way. And that way is the truth. That's the truth of the way it is. There is no argument. There's nothing that can stand against that. And that is what Jesus is arguing. Jesus is not going toe to toe. He is allowing, through his death on the cross, evil to collapse under its own weight. Because nothing can stand against the truth. I am the way, the truth. I am the truth. And in that truth, there is life. He goes on to say, no one comes to the Father but through me. That's exactly the truth. We can continue to try to do it our way through force, through trying to control, to trying to get my way, but it's ruthless. I mean, it's not ruthless, it's hopeless, because the truth stands. Truth holds regardless, even when those speaking don't understand it. And that's what's happening here. Pilate doesn't understand it. He's saying, what I've written, and it's the absolute truth. Jesus is the King of the Jews, representing all of humanity, all of those who suffer. This one fact reveals the futility of attempting to control the story. How many times today I tend to want to control the situation, and it's futile, because there's a truth that stands regardless. In the small exchange about this inscription, this declaration, this is the mystery of God's presence. We're moving to summary and then table time. The small exchange about the inscription, John reveals something immense. It's not just something we should pass over. God is fully present in the world through Jesus of Nazareth, with human systems, public power, fear, and violence. God is not faked out. He is absorbing all of this in its entirety. The cross shows us what human beings are capable of at our worst. There's one aspect of the flashlight. And at the same time, reveals a God who refuses to withdraw from this reality. God's relentless love in spite of us. That's the other side of the flashlight. So I'm taking a text and quoting it, God in Christ reconciling the world to himself. It is we who are being reconciled to him. A follow-up, God's rescue or reconciling, I should have used the same word there. God's reconciliation is occurring not through some sort of satisfying something God needs. That is in the framework of much of Christianity today, that God needs something and Jesus is satisfying that. That is not the particular stream that I'm flowing in. I'm moving in a different Christian theme that dates back to the church fathers. I don't believe God needed anything. It's God's relentless love that is being displayed. And what God is showing us, he's entering through Jesus, the Word becoming flesh, and remaining fully with us even to the most bitter end. The sign declares, here's the summary statement. The sign is saying this is what is true, although it wasn't meant to be true. This is what is true. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That sign is written for all of humanity, including us on this Zoom call. It's written in every language and displayed at the center of the world at this moment in time where no one can miss it. I've got the crosshairs on the cross. So, table time. John doesn't explain the inscription for us. He doesn't go to this detail. I went to the detail and I took a stab at it. He lets it stand there and asks us, his audience, to reckon with it. That's his intent. He wants us to reckon with this idea, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. If you and I are being invited as a part of his audience to reckon with this phrase, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, what kind of truth is being spoken here? What does that mean? And why would God choose to speak it from the cross? This is for discussion. A follow-up question is from a more personalized question, where do you tend to expect God to speak truth from? Where do you look for truth? And how does the cross enforce or disrupt those expectations? Boy, that's a good question. So guys, we got 20 minutes, just like right on time. And we've covered a little portion, an inscription, but it has an immense purpose within John's telling of his account. And I'd like to know what you guys think. What are your questions? What are your comments, concerns? What excites you using these questions? Let's hear from you guys. And again, you'll have to speak because right now I only see Carl, and I know there's more guys on the call. So speak up, and then we can go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, I had a couple of comments, and I don't know if it's going to answer the questions here, but it was interesting to me that the sign said, here is the King of the Jews. So I looked back because I knew I'd heard that phrase before. And in Matthew 2, the Magi come and they ask, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?
Isn't that interesting?
So there's a sign basically that would speak to the Jews. I mean, they know that there is a king coming. The problem is they've missed the boat on who this king is. Herod, or the inscription says, "King here hangs," or whatever, the King of the Jews, and I think that is a way of saying, "You guys wanted a king, here he is. I win." You know, and they're thinking, no, don't say that. You didn't win. We still have a king coming. So write that he claimed to be king of the Jews. So it's that power struggle, I think, of the Jews not wanting to think that they just lost against Herod, or not Herod. Now I'm drawing a blank. Pilate wrote on there, this is the king of the Jews. So he's basically saying, I win. And even if he believed he was not guilty, he's letting the Jews know, hey, I'm still in control because I've killed your king. And they're saying, no, 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 no. You killed a guy who says he's our king. So there's that
Yeah.
battle going on. But I love the way you said it, is that regardless of who thinks they won on this, God has said this statement on this plaque is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and
Really.
God said, no, I win. You know, he has accomplished what
Yeah.
he wanted to in bringing his people the salvation that they need and that only he can give.
Yeah.
And he's the one that is speaking the truth through this sign. And none of the other two groups, whether it's the world, because it was written in three different languages, or the Jews or Pilate, he is the one saying, I win, but I win for you.
Yeah.
This is your king. That
Yeah.
is truth. And what you haven't gotten yet, some of you have, but is that this was necessary in order for me to draw you back into the relationship that I want to have with you.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, Jeff, you always have such great comments. And yeah, and there's a lot there. What you're drawing out are two really important distinctions, and that's what you're naming right there. Rather than me jumping in there, anybody what you guys jump in on Jeff's comment or another one? What are your thoughts?
I got a couple.
Okay.
Well, a lot of scriptures come back to me all the time, and prior to this, somewhere it says, the ruler of this world is coming and he has no part in me. Basically, right now, we're witnessing the battle for the world. We're witnessing Satan, and everything he represents and does is being unloaded on Jesus. He says, I'm winning. And God sitting on the cross, and I don't know, I think he almost hopes he'll strike back because then that'll mean he joined forces with Satan. But God says,
Yeah.
no, I'm forgiving. You're torturing, I'm forgiving. And
Right.
they're looking up at him this, and somewhere Jesus said, anyone that follows me must take up his cross. And we kind of try to make that an analogy for him. No, you may have to take up your cross. That may
Right.
happen. But you're
Yeah.
going to do what I do, which you're going to suck up all the evil and you're going to forgive. So
Yeah.
this just isn't Jesus doing this. He's representing how he wants us to do this. And so the core issue here for me is the issue of violence. Are we
Yes.
going to take up violence or not?
Right.
Under any circumstances. And he says, pray for your enemies, forgive them. So right off the bat, the Sermon on the Mount, it's all coming back to here. He says, you're not going to become a violent people.
And thank you. Another great comment, Bill. And that is going back to my analogy of the flashlight. That is one aspect of that revelation. God's relentless love and allowing this to happen without striking back. If God strikes back, then he's bought in to the kingdom of this world.
Right.
Yeah. Good case for nonviolence.
Strong case for nonviolence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Well,
getting every day.
this is a little bit simplistic, um, but I'm struck again. I think sometimes, at least in my case, with the symbol of the cross, um, it becomes some form of commonplace in our thought, and it shouldn't. And it can be as simplified as looking at the horizontal and the vertical, which leads me to interpret the cross, the scene that's explained here, and the inscription. I view the cross as the intersection of humanity with infinity. And this is the only place where that completely happens. It's the only place where we, as imperfect humans, can be brought into the complete perfection of God's creation. So it's an intersection like none other that mankind has ever encountered, or instead of mankind plural, we as individuals. So it's a choice. Which way do we go? both ways exist. Certainly, the horizontal, our relationships across on that plane. But this is a call, this is an intersection where we can choose, well, actually, where we could not choose, only Jesus could choose to show us the direction at that corner, at that intersection. So it's kind of a bumbled way of putting it, but I'm reminded again not to take the symbol simply for granted.
Now, let me ask you, Dave, and feel free to respond however or not respond, but I'm hearing you piggyback on what Bill was just saying. The centrality of this moment is monumental. And I tried to depict that with my little crosshairs. It is the moment of history right here where we are being reconciled. And again, the mechanism we're going to be talking about, what is actually happening. But what I hear you say, Dave, is that even though there was this moment in time when this happened, it has direct application to you and I today, and you alluded to that. Is that true?
In Revelation, and I think it's 5:4. I can't remember because I can't remember.
Yeah.
Jesus is presented, behold, what does it say? Standing as if he were slain.
Oh yeah, the Lamb stand.
And the language there in the Greek and the tense is not used, and it's very, very particular and unusual. And what it does is actually states that, and here we are in Revelation, what it actually does is it states that this point on the cross has existed for all time and will exist for all time if we can recognize the intersection that we're at and make the correct turn.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's a wonderful reference in Revelation. A lamb having been slain. That may not be exactly right, but thank you.
Yeah, I think it's as if it were slain.
Yeah.
So it's I don't think anywhere else in Scripture is that exact verb tense used. So
where we're at in our discussion is just sort of recognizing this moment in history, which is rightly true, yes, but the application of that in our daily life, the cross in my daily life, that really has bearing in question number 2. And I think, honestly, in my life, much of my life has been convoluted with, yes, a giving myself over, but to the but also the need for control, the tension of that, the tension of desire to strike back. And I got to believe that same tension is in all of us. This is part of being human. But I've talked enough. What are you guys? What more do you have to say?
I've spent some time unfortunately, on YouTube recently because of I don't really know that much about religion as a polity kind of thing. So I'm trying to educate myself on it because of church and all. And I'm hearing more than I want to know. I had no idea that different denominations were pitted against each other to the degree they are, evidently. And it all seems to come from what the Jews were trying to do with Pilate's sign. I don't like the truth is right in front of me. I don't like it. Let me change the wording.
Right.
If I change the wording, then the truth will change.
Yeah.
And that's, in my opinion, that's not true. That's not what happens. What you do is just get another layer of division and a point of arguing from, and where you can say, well, I'm right. Look what it says. Yeah, it says that because you wrote it. if you left it the way it was, it wouldn't say that. The truth
Right.
stands as it is. The truth has always been. In the beginning was the word, the logos. Way
Yeah.
before language was invented, way before anybody wrote anything down, the truth existed. We
Yeah.
were fortunate, like, was it Job that said, how lucky are we that God put his thoughts in a book? We have the pleasure and the privilege of reading it, but that's not where truth started. We get to read it. But unfortunately, we as a people continue to think like the Jews did on the crucifixion. Let me just change that. I'll put this little different word in there and that'll make it all go away. No, it won't.
Right. Yeah. Right.
The truth is untouchable in Hebrews. It's quick and powerful, sharper. It's not going to go anywhere. And it was very revealing when you revealed it, Mike, that they want to change it.
Yeah.
It's so silly. It's
is.
usual and it's been done for centuries. But when you think about it, it's so silly that you can think you can change reality, the truth of God. If I put a pronoun in here, that'll make it my way.
And then I can control it. And that's why there's 40,000. That's why there's 40,000 Protestant denominations on a very simplistic response. I mean,
I
don't like how you did this.
I do not recommend going on YouTube for that purpose. I Googled, political discussions for church because of what's happening in my church.
Yeah.
And because I didn't understand it. I just don't understand church polity. But it's like, oh my God, this is going on everywhere. This is crazy. And the genesis of it is because somebody is harping on a word. Sometimes it's that simple. It's one singular word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, what you're pointing to, Vince, is exactly the spirit behind what I was trying to get across in that whole thing, is how ridiculous it is. They're getting what they want. Why do they need to change the wording? Because they want to be in control. Thank you, Vince.
One more last thing. I'm going to have to go, but this is a point at which the decision is what to believe versus how to live. The penal substitution is what to believe is God has his gun pointed at humanity. And he's fed up with us. He's going to destroy us, send us to hell. But Jesus steps in and takes the bullet. But it only takes the bullet for those people who believe he takes the bullet. The rest of you are doomed. That's the what. And so that becomes an orthodoxy kind of thinking. And the other one, if he has a king of the Jews, he's telling us, he goes, here's how you're to live. I'm the king, live by my standards. And my standards is to suck up evil, don't respond with it, and forgive people. And that's a way to live, not so much what to believe, but how to live. And that's a different way of looking at this, because it sets up for us a very scary option for us. Because the more that we're involved in self-centered and self-protection, the less we're going to want to read that sign and look at the cross. But the more we really want to live the way Jesus lives, because there's another side to it. His love, it's not all pain and suffering, but it's there. So it's kind of, we're making a decision on how to live versus what to believe. That's a little simplistic, but yeah.
There's what you're alluding to are different tracks of thinking within the Christian history. You named penal substitutionary atonement. That is a track, and there's outflow and ramifications of that. And then there is more of a participatory view of the cross. Jesus, in God in human flesh, identifying with humanity, allowing evil to expose and dissipate its energy to the nth degree. Within that track of thinking, of which that's where I'm coming from, is a much more unified and cohesive view of what it means union in Christ. The Christ in you and the you in Christ, which Paul uses numerous times, which is the bulk of when he's talking about application of the faith. This is what he's talking about. It is much more cohesive along those lines. So, we're not trying to prove a point here, but we want to move through this to the end result of what does it mean to be in Christ and for Christ to be in me. That is inspiring stuff. I don't have to do it. It's been done. And that's what the wonderful news is of the gospel. Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to preach there. Anyway, guys, one more quick comment. And I don't know who's on the call. Oh, there's Carl.
Yeah.
And who's that with you, Carl?
This is my son, Rich, from Phoenix. He's up.
Well, hey, Rich. Good to have you today.
How you doing?
Well, I'm good, and thanks for joining us.
Okay, good.
Well, Carl, do you have a comment?
Oh, I'm just wondering. So you don't adhere to the penal substitutionary view of the atonement?
I think it's a theory, but I don't adhere to that theory because it puts God in a position where God needs something, where God needs to be satisfied. It's not.
Well, that's true. I would argue the holiness of God needs to be satisfied, and the judgment of sin needs to be satisfied. If Christ if the sins of the world are not poured out and judged in Christ, then sin is not fully judged. So I would say, yes, the holiness of God does demand a penal substitutionary atonement.
Rich, we could talk for hours about this, and I'm fully aware of what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think for right now, guys, we're going to sign off, and we're going to call it a study. And next week, we're going to be looking at little snapshots of while Jesus is hanging on the cross, what is happening in that near locale, what is going on. We've looked at the signage. Next week, we'll be looking at the guards, and then we'll move on to his mother and the disciple. There's these little snippets, and John has put them in there for a reason for us as readers in the 21st century. And there's so much more to look at. Have a good week, fellas. Rich, thanks for joining us.
Good to meet you.
And bye for now.